NATO has just had one of its most pivotal summits in Europe for years, and Donald Trump's sudden shift, yes another one, on Ukraine, Russia and Vladimir Putin has left the alliance and seeming much of the world scratching its head. Has Trump come round to seeing, heck, even understanding the value of the alliance? Or is there a bigger strategic play at work? Or is he simply having a mood swing? Well, in this video, I aim to explore some of the core themes that came out of NATO's summit in 2025, what it means, why these erratic shifts matter, and what could happen next.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to The Global Gambit. If you're new here, my name is Pyotr Kurzin, and I hold a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University in Strategic Studies and Economics, having worked in the UN, the World Bank, and in the field. In this video, I wanted to explore the recent shifts in Donald Trump's tone, yet again, towards Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Russian President Vladimir Putin, signalling a potential pivot in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Whilst much attention has been on Israel and Iran in the past 2 weeks, including on this channel, which I encourage you to go and have a look, including implications for Russia, the big focus outside of that was the NATO summit, which wrapped up yesterday. After months of seeming diplomatic tension, Trump has now publicly described, after his latest meeting with Zelenskyy, as, quote, very nice, and had face-to-face discussions on the sidelines of the summit, while also issuing a rare stern warning to Putin to end his devastating war in Ukraine. But why this sudden shift, and what does this mean for Europe's defence landscape? Seemingly, Trump came away from contexts that I've spoken to with much more of an amicable understanding or even appreciation for the role of NATO, emphasising that he could see the love and care that a lot of the leaders had for their countries and the role NATO has in ensuring the prosperity or protection of them. Now, before we get into the more recent developments, and be sure to stick around to the end for one particular reason I think could be the biggest of all, you have to understand Trump's understanding or perspective of NATO historically and the United States relationship. The US has served as the cornerstone of the alliance and European security, providing military resources, nuclear deterrence, and strategic leadership. Throughout the Cold War, American troops stationed across Europe symbolized an unshakable guarantee against the perceived Soviet aggression. This transatlantic alliance ensured stability and peace, enabling European nations to focus on economic recovery and prosperity in many ways that they were preaching yesterday. However, the stability of this arrangement has increasingly come into question, particularly with Trump's presidency, both in his first and second term. His first term was characterized by skepticism towards NATO, famously branding it obsolete and consistently criticizing European allies for insufficient defense spending, which in many eyes, including the creator of this channel, agrees with. The free loading and free riding of Europe has been a massive issue. Trump's return to office, though, only intensifies these concerns, and many in the earlier part of this year were feeling that this could be, well, the potential end of NATO as we know it, underscored by Trump's America First doctrine, prioritizing national interests over international alliances, which couldn't be more in contrast to the multilateralist approach of President Biden. Indeed, the US had strongly supported Ukraine following Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, supplying billions in military aid and intelligence, as I'm sure you are more than well aware. Trump's early second-term actions, notably a temporary freeze on military support to Kiev and public clashes with Zelenskyy in the White House, heightened fears in America withdrawing from Europe's defense framework, or at least severely diminishing the funding, which would make NATO an effective husk of its former self. If you're finding this breakdown insightful, then don't forget to hit the like button. It tells the algorithm you're enjoying this analysis and helps people understand what's really going on behind the headlines, as well as hearing beautiful accents such as the British one. Quips aside, let's get back into the actual topic. Trump's recent statements at the NATO summit, though, have, in the past 2 days, suggested a significant recalibration. After a private meeting with Zelenskyy, Trump warmly described their interaction as very nice, acknowledging he is, quote, fighting a tough battle. It's a tough battle. Additionally, Trump publicly expressed yet again his frustration with Putin's intransience, asserting Vladimir Putin really has to end that war. People are dying at levels people haven't seen before for a long time. The eloquence there clearly on display, but jokes aside, it is increasingly clear President Trump has and is losing his patience with Vladimir Putin. You recall the comments he made in May about Putin's unwillingness to stop the war and indiscriminately firing rockets across Ukraine. It indeed does mark a notable departure from Trump's previously softer stances towards Putin, with whom he maintained direct communication and peace negotiations, compared to Ukraine, where they had to go through Keith Kellogg, or even worse, Steve Witkoff. Zelenskyy has described the NATO summit dialogue as, quote, long and substantive, covering key issues like protection strategies and achieving that peace. Although Trump dismissed specific ceasefire discussions, he showed clear interest in ending the war, stating, I think it's a great time to end it. I'm going to speak to Vladimir Putin and see if we can get it ended. Again, a lot of rhetoric, but nothing of substance really in terms of policy shift or something. It feels like we are getting a bit repetitive at this point. That said, the diplomatic urgency coincides with a dramatic escalation by Russian military forces. Rothschild Consulting reported a surge in Russian drone attacks, for example, counting over 4,300 launches in June alone. Concurrently, Russian ground forces have rapidly advanced, targeting strategic Ukrainian cities such as Pokrovsk and Kunska-Ninivka, reducing them to near ghost towns throughout continuous bombardment and artillery fire. However, it should be maintained that in the bigger picture of things, Russia hasn't really changed its overall territorial control of about 20% of Ukraine, indicating that despite the rhetoric, on the ground very little is changing, and Pokrovsk, for example, has been months under the taking. Trump recently highlighted the severe human cost, that said, claiming combined Ukrainian and Russian casualties reached 7,000 in 1 week, although this figure, along with almost everything he says, is highly unverifiable. Now, from Zelensky's perspective, he is under severe pressure, and there is a dwindling American arms supply, meaning that Zelenskyy has been appealing to Trump for more military support, particularly US-made Patriot air defense systems and interceptor missiles. Trump acknowledged Ukraine's urgent needs, indicating the US is considering providing more Patriots, despite competing demands from Israel and domestic security priorities. Indeed, this is where I think we could potentially come to a head, in that the unprecedented exchanges over the 12-day war, as it's now being called, between Iran and Israel means the United States will have to make some considerations of who it finds more strategically important and, where its loyalty ultimately lies, Israel or Ukraine. And I think I know which one that is more likely to go towards. Equally, amid the growing uncertainty about America's long-term commitment to NATO, European leaders face a pivotal decision. Germany, historically under Merkel, adopted a more cautious approach to military spending, relying heavily on American support. Under Olaf Scholz, that was only maintained, and frustratedly, this fence-sitting, did a lot to worry those about Germany's capacity to really take security and collective defense seriously. However, the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Germany has radically altered this stance, significantly increasing defense spending and reviving domestic military production capabilities in only a matter of months. Merz's proactive policy includes discussions on reintroducing conscription to bolster the Bundeswehr, reflect an urgent need for increased personnel. After visiting the White House, moreover, Merz had confidently stated he had absolutely no doubt about America's NATO commitment, though German officials privately prepare for a potential reduction of US troops. Being the biggest economic power, Germany's needs to step up more than anyone else. Parallel to Germany's evolving strategy, Emmanuel Macron has long been the champion of Europe's strategic autonomy, calling for robust and independent European defence capabilities. Initially viewed as overly ambitious or even antagonistic to NATO, actually, Macron's vision has now gained significant traction, especially in the past 6 months, as European leaders acknowledge Trump's unpredictability. Macron promotes strengthening Europe's defence industries, joint military procurement, missile defence, and advanced surveillance system. Brussels supports Macron's visions in principle, recently introducing what's known as cooperative military procurement mechanisms, aiming to enhance Europe's self-reliance. And, the arguably European Commission Vice President or Foreign Secretary, Kaja Kallas emphasized Europe's need to accelerate defense spending, highlighting Russia's aggressive investment as a stark contrast. Indeed, it is almost the complacency, the fact that Europe has been so out of any wartime setting for so long that it is very difficult to get countries, notably Spain, that has been dragging its heels, or most vocally of all countries, to really commit to this 3.5 core military spending of GDP, with another 1.5 dedicated to cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, though this was achieved yesterday and is considered by many, including Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, as a founding emphasis of the commitment and long-standing capacity of the NATO alliance. However, despite this progress, Trump's unpredictably does alarm European allies. We cannot forget what Vice President J.D. Vance said at the Munich Security Council in February. And so you have this paradox. Europe must strategically prepare for potential US withdrawal without inadvertently accelerating it. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius explicitly called for a clear US roadmap for future military deployments to avoid chaotic withdrawals akin to Afghanistan in 2021. However, other NATO allies fear pressing Washington might provoke precisely that withdrawal they aim to prevent. And so European capitals remain wary of Trump's transactionality, but also his erraticism. They realize the need to plan for a future where US support may well be conditional or, well, non-existent. Indeed, Macron and Merz's leadership highlights a renewed dynamism between the Franco-German axis, arguably the core of the European Union and underlying European role within NATO. But NATO's integrated military command is heavily still dependent on US capabilities, strategic intelligence, heavy lift transport, space assets, and nuclear deterrence. You can find videos on the channel I've discussed about the role the British and French may have in such a context. Replacing these strategic enablers would require extensive collaboration, funding, and years of preparation, something that Europe may or not have if the Bloomberg assessment of what a Russian invasion or aggression may look like. Trump's diplomatic recalibration with Ukraine and Russia generates cautious optimism, but it also amplifies critical questions about NATO's short to medium future and Europe's ability to independently manage its security. Zelensky's improved rapport with Trump provides temporary relief, but underscores Europe's urgent need to continue to pursue strategic autonomy. If you found this video thought-provoking, then consider watching my next breakdown in the video below, where I go into a specific element of the war in Ukraine and one of the very many guests on the channel as well. Until then, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you see what comes next and who we'll be talking to about the ever-changing world of geopolitics. Take care, everyone.